Today on the Transplant Helper, we're going to be talking about your Transplant Fitness score. Are you actually prepared? Are you ready to face transplant? Stay tuned.
Hit the subscribe button and the bell notification to become part of the Transplant Helper community.
Hey folks, welcome back to the Transplant Helper again today. My name is Jim Merle, and yes, today we are discussing transplant fitness. However, don't be misled in the beginning. We are not only talking about that of physical fitness, we're talking about so much more. As a matter of fact, I'm going to be sharing with you today a 4-part list or maybe a checklist that you can put in your mind starting right now today in order to determine if you're actually ready to face transplant, and more than that, to face it successfully, because that's ultimately is the goal of all of us, is if we've got to face transplant, to go through the journey successfully and to have a great life after the fact. So with that being said, I completely understand that none of us, not even one of us, ever wanted to hear the word transplant associated with our name and in the same sentence, or maybe in the same paragraph, maybe in the same chapter or book for that matter. But nonetheless, I can still remember those words ringing out in my ears back about almost 12 years ago now, when a doctor stood over my bed just after a heart catheterization, which was supposed to take 45 minutes. Actually took about 5 hours, but he was standing over my bed at that moment. Things had not gone well. I could tell that from the look on his face. And he leaned forward and he said, "Jim, there basically are no more options. This is the end of the road. You're going to need a heart transplant." And the moment he used the term heart transplant, again associated with Jim, my name, that threw me for a loop. And I began in my mind, emotionally, physically, financially, spiritually, every one of these areas, I began to kind of reel back and try to determine what was my plan of attack, what could be done, and how could I face this in the best way. So I kind of formulated something in my mind way back then that I've kind of known about and learned about over time as a process to prepare for transplant, and that is what I'm going to be sharing with you here today. So we must kick it off by saying, obviously, you have to be physically prepared for transplant. So it comes down to your physical fitness above everything else. Now, you understand when we're talking about transplant in the same line or phrase with physical fitness, it's more than likely I'm not talking about having an enormous amount of agility or strength or endurance or the ability to do anything you want to do. That's probably not going to happen. Whether you're heart, lung, liver, kidney, or pancreas, whatever type of transplant, potentially, you are probably at a physical place right now where you might be at your lowest. If not, unfortunately, you're probably headed toward your lowest point in life. So you're not going to be that physically fit or strong facing this, but you've got to be at that point. It's that fine line, that razor's edge between being sick enough to need the transplant and well enough to be able to survive the surgery itself, okay? It's just a difficult place to be. So what I'm going to encourage you to do in light of physical fitness in this is to do pretty much everything that you can that is allowed by your doctors, okay? You've got to keep yourself as healthy as possible, whether that's through controlling your diet, your exercise, your habits, trying to rid yourself of anything in life that may be hindering you in this. You've got to do the best you can to physically be fit to face this transplant. I can remember some of the ways I did that in the beginning. It came down to something a physical therapist told me about, basically using the phrase, "Jim, you need to keep your legs." And what he meant by that is, even though I was pretty much bedridden and sleeping most of the day, anytime that I was awake, I did something, whether it's just flexing my feet back and forth, pushing up against the bed, the footboard of a bed or whatever, trying to get up and down as much as I could, trying to take as many steps as I could, even though they may be few, but trying to keep myself as physically fit, particularly in my legs, so that I could face the surgery. Because the healthier you go in, or the more physically fit you go into any surgery, the better off you're going to come out. And that's probably one of the keys as to why within about 12 hours, I was walking up and down the halls after heart transplant, because I kept myself physically fit. So you've got to do that. That is number one. Number two, you've got to also be emotionally fit. You've got to get your mindset right now. Don't wait till tomorrow. Don't wait till next week. Get your mindset right now that you are going to do this, you are going to survive this, and even more than that, that you're going to thrive during this process. You've got to get yourself mentally ready that you're going to be challenged in some ways that perhaps you've never been challenged in your life. You're going to be challenged in some ways that perhaps you would never want to be challenged in your life. And you've got to have that mental strength. You've got to have that something within inside you that burns inside you, just says, I'm going to live. No matter what I have to endure, whatever I have to face emotionally, I'm going to live. And then expect that you're going to have many, many low days. You're going to have a lot of days where there's a lot of frustration, a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, a lot of pain that you're going to have to endure. And a lot of times you're going to feel like you're all alone in that process. But just keep in mind that you are never alone in the process. God can always be with you, and that you yourself have to be with yourself. Don't ever allow yourself to detach from the fact that mentally and emotionally you want to be healthy. So you've got to be emotionally fit. Number 3 in this, you've also got to be financially fit, okay? It's just the truth of this thing. This process, I mean by that, the transplant process itself is a very, 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 did I say very enough? A very expensive endeavor. I can remember pre-transplant, what is almost getting ready for the process and going through some of the, I don't know what you call it other than the financial advisement sessions and all. They told me that unless I had great insurance, basically, I would need to bring to the hospital $750,000 to pay cash up front. Now, that $750,000 figure was almost 10, 12 years ago, so I'm sure it could be much higher than that now. But even back then, $750,000. And supposedly that was going to pay for the hospital stay leading up to transplant, the surgery itself and all that was involved, stay in the hospital for about 6 weeks-ish after. Thankfully, I didn't have to stay that long, but about six weeks after. And then that was assumed, that number also to include enough money to cover all the follow-up visits, procedures, and appointments that would come within the first year. Maybe even medication was included in that. But nonetheless, $750,000. Now, ultimately, even back then, when I finally received a bill in the mail for it, it was $1.4 million. And that was just something that was impossible for me to have ever paid. But thankfully, yes, I did have good insurance. And you got to be sure that as you face the transplant process, that you start working right now, today, on that financial fitness. That could be saving a little bit of money, tucking away a bit of a nest egg, albeit that's very hard to do when you're, ill to the point of death, but could be something like that. It obviously needs to be in the form of the best insurance you can possibly get your hands on, whether it's through an employer, a spouse's employer, some type of government assistance program, other third-party insurance programs. Just really sit down with everyone that you can related to insurance and finances and talk it over with them exactly what you're going to need and what is going to be available to you in the future. And then be aware that at some point, none of us, not me, perhaps most likely not even you, could ever pay for this on our own, even with the insurance aside from that. So be prepared in that to get other assistance. And I always recommend to people, before they really go any farther than the insurance companies, sit down with your hospital, sit down with your transplant centers, go into the financial offices, go into the social workers' offices. They're available. You probably have to ask, but go in and sit down with them and see if they have some type of financial assistance / UAB, called it a charity care type of program that you can be involved in. Now, a lot of times those are financial based, and so they're based on income, they're based on assets, that sort of thing. So you may have to do kind of that shell game of moving some things around, or maybe liquidating a few assets going into this to get yourself ready for that assistance. But try your best and fight hard to get some level of financial assistance. That way, even with the insurance program, if there are any balances that are left, like again, I stated mine was $1.4 million, I actually paid zero for the transplant itself. Medications were high, but I actually paid zero for the transplant itself when it was all said and done, because this financial assistance charity care program took over. And I've got other videos related to that. We're going to come back to this one on next week anyway and talk more about the money of things. But that's in the onset of it. Just be financially fit and get ready for this. In the next place, not only physically, emotionally, and financially fit, I would encourage you personally to be spiritually fit, okay? It's going to take something that is without of you to survive this process, something that goes beyond just a positive mindset or a good way of thinking. You've got to have someone there to support you outside of yourself. I suggest God to do so, but to get you through this thing. You got to have someone who has more information, more inspiration, more power and authority than you have yourself in this life. And so I would encourage you to get spiritually fit. Do whatever it is you need to do. Open up your Bible, study it, examine it, see what God's plan is for you and your life and what it is for all of mankind for that matter. And whatever that book encourages you to do, do that. Get in the right standing with God so that you have that higher power, if you will, that can give you that help, that can give you that assistance in that time, because your spiritual fitness is going to be tried. Even if you're a person like I am, or was, still am, but was then. You know, I was a gospel preacher, so I was one who preached the Bible, who believed in God, who believed in Jesus and all these sorts of things. But even then, my faith was tested during these times. And there were days when I woke up and kind of almost wanted to shake my fist at God and say, God, why me? Why am I dealing with this? And it caused my faith to dip and to falter a little bit. And I fell on my face a few times. But God is the one that can be there with you to bring you out of that, to have you to be brought out of that so that He can carry you through this process. Because I don't honestly believe that any of us can do this well without God being on our side. So how physically, how emotionally, how financially, how spiritually fit are you? I think you could put a series of check boxes up and say, okay, am I physically fit? Can I do anything? Check. Am I, in that sense, emotionally fit? Have I got the mindset? I've got the will to do this? Check. Have I got my finances in a row? Do I have insurance? Do I have other ways of paying for things? Check. And then right there, not at the bottom, but last that I listed, am I in a good relationship with God? Where if what I'm facing right now is not the successful story that I want, but maybe in eternity to be with God. Am I ready for that? Hope you can also check that box. Thank you so much for joining me. Until next time, stay stronger, friends.